Hello and welcome to a special Meet the Adopter webcast. Our theme tonight is adoption support. As you may know, the government recently introduced the Adoption Support Fund, and there's lots of information about the fund and how it works on the First for Adoption website, firstforadoption.org.uk. But tonight we're going to be taking a look at some of the kinds of support available to adoptive families. We're coming to you from one of the therapy rooms at Adoptionplus. Adoptionplus is an adoption agency that offers a range of therapies for adoptive families. And to tell us more, we're joined by Dr. Ben Gurney-Smith, who's a consultant chartered clinical psychologist, Julia Davis, who's a senior therapeutic social worker and a play therapist, and Rachel Staff, who's also a senior therapeutic social worker. Thank you for all your questions so far. If you'd like to join in the conversation this evening, it's not too late. You can tweet at First for Adoption using the hashtag #MeetTheAdopter, or you can email socialmedia@firstforadoption.org.uk. Before we come to those questions, welcome to Ben, Julia, and Rachel. Ben, if we can start with you. Are there any particular issues and challenges facing adopted children and their families?
When you look at the essential differences between what it means to be a biological parent and being an adoptive parent, you see a number of key differences. One of the key ones is that the difficulty for the child may be that they don't turn towards you for comfort or soothing and care, and that's uniquely stressful. So parents will find, well, in any relationship, if you don't feel that you're useful for the other person, in this case the child, then that brings about stress, feelings of rejection, and that can be extremely painful.
Now, I know that many people watching this will have heard of dyadic developmental psychotherapy, or DDP as it's more commonly known, and I know that that's something that you practice here. Can you tell us a bit about how that, well, what it is and how it works and how it can be helpful to adoptive families?
Dyadic developmental psychotherapy is a relational therapy, and it was developed by Dan Hughes, primarily in recognition that children didn't turn towards their attachment figures or their new parents for comfort and security. And because comfort and security and being able to benefit from a relationship is so key to mental health, without that, children were more likely to struggle. The approach seeks to help the child be open to the new relationship, to be able to say, that was then, that went before, this is now. And it's an active relational therapy in so much as it brings the parent and the child together, which is facilitated by the therapist. So it's very unique in that way. And where you look at people who have recovered from difficult beginnings through abuse and neglect, they tend to have a number of features which the model tries to address, which is they're able to put thoughts with feelings. So there's an integration of what happened and a sense of being able to express their feeling about it.
Which must be a great start for you as a therapist.
Yes, I mean, I think often you might hear children where they're struggling being able to robotically sort of say this happened and that happened, and there's no feeling in it. Other children might be so overwhelmed by the experience that they're overcome by feeling and have no words. So you're looking for an integration of the two, and the therapist, with the active involvement of the parent or parents, will help the child put the words to the feelings in a way that isn't overwhelming and helps them get the comfort and what we would call co-regulation from the parent about it. Often at the centre of this is that they're thinking somehow all of these things are their fault, all these events that have happened to them, how their birth parents behave towards them, or the fact that they move foster placements might be something to do with them. And the therapy helps the child reappraise those as events rather than a sense of how they see themselves.
It sounds scary and daunting, and I know that in many cases It can be, but that's not the whole story, is it? It's no accident that we're sitting in this lovely room here, which I must say we tidied up because it's full. I don't know if people watching can see, but it's full of lovely bright cushions and cuddly toys. There's a doll's house. There's all sorts of... And am I right in thinking that one of the central tenets of DDP is playfulness? Play is very important.
Yes, playfulness. If you think about how relationships work well, obviously it has to be well timed, but being playful is a way of just being together, enjoying one another, enjoying a shared experience, and a way of connecting. So that's one way. There are three others: acceptance, curiosity and empathy are also important. I think as parents we want to reassure our children very quickly, and sometimes we don't do enough acceptance, and we know that where children have many struggles with big experiences in their lives, that if we say, it's okay, that won't happen again, we may not get the full connection and communication about that experience. So we have to say, I'm sorry that happened to you, and that may be a bit more difficult for, you know, a well-meaning parent to do, but it's quite important, and therapy would help with that. Curiosity is also a bit about wondering rather than sort of doing the Spanish Inquisition about experience, and that helps keep things open. And empathy is about saying with feeling, I've got it and I understand it. And again, that facilitates openness.
Thank you. Now, I know that we could dig a lot deeper into all this because we're only scratching the surface, and it wouldn't be fair because we've got two other interesting people here and a limited amount of time. So if I may, you're pointing the way and people can investigate further, and we'll tell them how to a little bit later. But if I may, I'll move on. Thank you for that. I know also I was intrigued to learn that one of the other things you do here is, and again, many people will know about mindfulness, and that's something that your work here involves too. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think I referred to the effect of stress due to difficulties in the relationship. Mindfulness is a well-evidenced sort of treatment for stress and depression and other conditions. But based on a bit of research we did, we found that just for any parent, mindfulness may be actually really useful for that if you're an adoptive parent. And so we have a mindfulness practitioner who delivers the 8-week evidence-based course, and we found that we're seeing good changes before and after those sessions. Why mindfulness? It's not just about bringing down stress. It brings about some of those attitudes, perhaps naturally, that I was talking about in dyadic developmental psychotherapy. So acceptance, just accepting that this is what's happening now, can bring about much more opportunity for connection with your child, if you're able to do that for yourself particularly. And also, when things are difficult, I think we can give ourselves a hard time, and if we're doing that, we're probably not in the best place to be open to someone else. So mindfulness can also help people feel kinder towards themselves as well. I think that's really important in relationships which can be uniquely stressful, and that's why we're finding it quite useful for adoptive parents.
Is this quite a new, are you amongst, is it widely known and understood that mindfulness can be one of the helpful tools to use when...
Well, we've sought to sort of develop it carefully. We've got some research which we're hoping will be published soon on that, and also we will be reporting on how well we're doing. But it is relatively new. I mean, there's a lot of interest in mindfulness. Yeah. It just happens to be working really quite well in this setting.
That's good to know. If I may, I'll move on to a couple of emails which I'd like to read for you. This one is from someone who's asked to remain anonymous. I've learnt some strategies that work pretty well when my little one's behaviour is difficult, but I'm having a constant battle with my mum, who thinks I'm not strict enough, and it's stressing me out trying to explain. Is there a book or some training for relatives to help them understand why our children need a different approach? Please don't give out my name. We're not going to give out your name. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's quite a common scenario, particularly where we're asking parents to try something different. We're asking them to work on the relationship first before they can actually help the child be open to normal parenting, in other words, addressing the behaviour, maybe giving a message through a sanction or something like that. But we do hear that a lot from parents who are probably, they've found their own way, that things like normal parenting, timeout and so on just doesn't work. So they're having to look for different approaches. I think we'd recommend Nurturing Attachments by Kim Golding as a really useful book. It's pitched for professionals or parents and carers. And that covers the theory and some of the evidence why you need to do things differently with adopted children.
Thank you. That sounds like a good recommendation, rather. So that's Nurturing Attachments by Kim Golding, which I guess you could Google or find in your local bookshop. Thank you for that, Ben. Another quick email from somebody called Cherry Red. I'm worried about my 8-year-old son. His lack of emotional response makes me think he's autistic. My adoption support worker says it's attachment issues. He struggles to make friends at school and he's really controlling and angry at times, but then he can be really passive and unresponsive. I feel like I'm floundering. I've been offered parenting classes, but I'd like to push for an assessment. Would that be the right thing to do, Ben?
Well, I think that's the answer. I think there's a degree of misunderstanding about autism and attachment, as if you can only have one or the other. In fact, you can have both. There's some good research around that. But teasing out the two can be problematic, and it can cause headaches for professionals as well as parents. So I think a good assessment that's informed by a developmental approach is probably the best thing to look at.
Okay, thank you very much. If I may, I'd like to continue with an email. We're lucky enough to have Julia here, and this question might be one that you can help with. In fact, I'm sure it will be. As a play therapist, perhaps you can answer Michelle's question. She writes, I've heard of play therapy and I've heard of theraplay, but I'm not sure if they are the same thing. Can you tell me if there is any difference between them? So play therapy, which lots of us will have heard of, and theraplay.
The thing that links them is the word play, but theraplay is an attachment-based intervention we use. So it's a way of playing in the here and now. That's really important, that it's not thinking about the past or what might come next. It's about thinking in the moment, playing with your child and really having some joy with them, some fun, and also looking at some of the key attachment issues. So we do play really simple things, the things you do when you have a little baby. So blowing bubbles, singing songs, rocking them on your lap. We might play games with food, or we might do things like Simon Says, really old-fashioned games. But they've all got a connection with attachment. They're all thinking about nurture, about being close with your child, making great eye contact with them, having an experience of safe touch, which some of our children haven't had before, and then thinking about following the adult, because the thing about theraplay is it's adult-led. So that's one of the key differences about it. So whoever's playing, so it might be me and the adoptive mum and their child, we would lead the session and the child would join in and follow the parent. So they're learning and experiencing a close attachment, and that helps them build a sense of a positive attachment with them.
So you've touched on something that's interesting. Thank you, Julia. It's a lot of people, when they imagine children in a therapeutic situation, if they've never been around that kind of situation before, might be concerned that the child is left alone with the therapist.
Okay.
And whereas you're saying that this is a lot of the work, and it came up with what Ben was saying earlier as well, is about the whole family. It's not just about the child.
Yeah. That's one of the key things about therapy. It's very much parent and child. So you would have all of them. If there are lots of siblings, you'd have everybody in and be playing with everybody, or you might just concentrate on maybe one child with one of their parents, depending on what their needs are. And that's probably one of the key differences in thinking about traditional non-directive play therapy. Would be very much, it's child-led, and you would follow the child in the play. So, but I'm quite keen on having parents also present for that as well, thinking about building the attachment and helping them help their child process their experience. So play therapy uses things like sand tray work. We might make models of things. We might play with the toys and create stories. But it's all about helping that child, as Ben said, put words to feelings if they're going to create a story, to help them understand their experiences. So we would do that in play therapy. So that's probably one of the key differences, that it's child-led.
And how early could you start working with a child? I mean, presumably language is
For
an
play
issue.
therapy, you would go kind of, well, it depends really. I would say 3+ really, but for theraplay, we start with the absolute tiny ones. You can start with babies and do theraplay with very, very little
Because
ones.
of the touch element that you
absolutely,
mentioned.
yeah.
And could you, for instance, work with children who were adopted together as siblings?
No, we quite often work with whole families as well.
Yeah.
And that can get quite lively, but yes, we do have the whole family joining in. And it's a real way of bringing back some joy into the relationship, because when things have got difficult, therapy is a great way to induce a sense of fun again and kind of reconnect with your child if it's been a bit difficult. So it's a really good way of introducing that into the experience.
Thank you. Can I ask you a little about the word attachment, which keeps coming up, and I'm mindful of the fact that the three of us sitting here with our various experiences, you three much more in depth than mine, know about attachment. But if anyone's watching this, can we give a little thumbnail sketch of what we mean when we say attachment? Because it sounds quite straightforward, but what are we talking about when we talk about attachment?
I guess we're looking at a relationship in which a child's needs are met, and that can go well and it can go not so well, can't it? In terms of when we talk about attachment difficulties, when that child's needs aren't met so well, that then they can experience difficulties in that attachment relationship. So that's one of the key things we think about, is what that relationship looks and feels like, and how we can help them to experience it as a relationship in which that child can trust that their needs will be met. I guess you might want to add some more to that, but because it's a huge subject.
Isn't it? Yeah. Well, Rachel, you've been sitting here very patiently, for which much thanks. I know that you work with families and adoptive teenagers within the family.
Yep.
Are there particular issues? We mentioned attachment, but perhaps that's not the prime focus with children and families in that situation, but are there particular issues for those families?
Attachment can definitely be, we're maintaining healthy attachments can definitely be a struggle in the teenage years for adopted young people. I think that generally we anticipate that adopted teenagers will have additional difficulties to those that come with the usual developmental challenges with adolescents. So most of the young people we work with will have been through very traumatic early experiences, will have had early experiences of loss before they're placed with their adoptive families. And in teenage years, themes can come to the fore and difficulties can come to the fore, which can feel quite frightening for adoptive parents and actually for the teenagers themselves sometimes. One of the things we do in working with adoptive parents, first and foremost, because we always begin there really, is to try and normalise some of those things that are going on. So, for example, we know that teenagers might struggle with forming a healthy identity, particularly if they've had early difficult experiences. We know they may struggle with relationships with their parents, but also peer relationships. They may really struggle with education. They may really need to come to terms with feelings around contact with birth families. So there's lots going on for teenagers who are adopted. And most parents will recognise that the teenage years are fairly challenging anyway.
Yeah.
For adoptive parents, it often feels like parenting with bells on, I think, because there's lots of additional developmental challenges for those young people. We always start with supporting the parents, because they're the people who are supporting the young person, sort of 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But working with the families and the teenagers themselves, we use DDP, we'll use theraplay, we'll also use approaches like therapeutic life story work, which can be incredibly valuable for adopted teenagers because it addresses some of the sort of key elements they're struggling with identity and those kinds of things.
Would you work with a teenager? Would you work with, I guess, as you say, it's important to look at the family holistically, but would you work with a teenager, for instance, alone, away from the parents, if it was appropriate?
I think with teenagers...
I'm just thinking of that teenage,
yeah.
you know, as you say, generally a teenage the teenage years can be about privacy, they can be about creating one's own territory and space.
And
so
a need
those
for
issues
some
must come up.
autonomy and all of those kinds of things. And you have to respect that within the work. So sometimes you might be spending time with the young person alone, but actually relationship is everything in teenage years. And whilst teenagers are heading towards independence, they also need dependence. And for many of the young people we work with, they're emotionally perhaps quite immature. Developmentally, they're not quite where they should be, or they're quite spiky in terms of their developmental profile. So for those young people, they need an additional emphasis, really, on maintaining a healthy relationship with their parents, as hard as that struggle can be, because that's the thing, actually, that carries those families through. If you've got the relationship, you've got everything. So that's always our emphasis.
Thank you. Julia, I wanted to come back to you and ask you a little bit about what families who are perhaps just starting out with their adopted child, just getting used to the idea that perhaps things aren't going to be plain sailing. Are there any useful tips that you could share in terms of to see them through, really?
Well, I think that being prepared as they can, reading as much before they have their child come with them, and thinking really, adopting an attachment perspective is really the most useful way to go. So really developing their understanding about the importance of understanding attachment and the difficulties a child might bring with them. And we understand that children, as soon as they come to adoptive, they don't automatically just heal and be better. They need maybe some support with the difficulties that come with them because of the loss they've experienced, and then maybe the developmental difficulties they might experience because of what's happened to them. And I think that everybody seems to do the absolute best they can, is our experience of families when they come to us, but that they might need to seek some additional support if things are difficult. So we're very mindful of them seeking out support from their local authority to get an assessment if they find that things are difficult.
I guess not to think, when I've spoken to people in my job, not to think, A, that they're alone, and that they're the only ones in that situation, because as I'm sure you see time and time again, although every family is unique and every child is an individual, there are themes that recur, and not to be afraid to put one's hand up and say, as you say, to seek that help. Well, that's almost all we've got time for. Before we draw to a close, any final thoughts or pieces of advice that you'd like to share?
Well, just to reinforce that point about early intervention, really, or prevention. If we were to truly recognise, adoptive parenting is about setting out with, high hopes, good expectations, probably people who are ready as they're ever going to be to have a relationship with a child. And I think if services can be preventative and keep that going, there is the opportunity for that being the best start, really, for families. But it does require services to be positively encouraging parents putting their hands up and saying, this is something not right here. This isn't quite what I was expecting, and I'm noticing I'm being affected by it.
Thank you. Well, thank you to Ben, to Julia, and to Rachel. As I said at the beginning, we've only scratched the surface, but and I'm sorry that we've not managed to answer more of the questions that have come through. There is lots more information about therapy providers near you and how to apply for the Adoption Support Fund on our website at firstforadoption.org.uk. And of course you can call our information line between 10 and 6, Monday to Friday. That's 0300 222 0022. That's all for now. Good night.